of heart-healthy California walnuts at Jewel Osco.
This is our great-grandfather, who had a dream in 1945 to open a family business in his name. This is our grandfather, who expanded on that dream, bringing custom furniture to Chicago. This is our father and his brothers, who grew that dream into the 10 showrooms here today. This is us, 4 sisters who want to make the generations before us proud while making Chicago homes beautiful. Since 1945, this is Smith.
Programming on WTTW originates from the Alexandra C. and John D. Nichols Broadcast Operations Center. We gratefully acknowledge their outstanding support.
Hey, bud, how's pajama day?
You mean school picture day?
No.
Life isn't always simple, but eating Heart Smart for American Heart Month is. Look for displays of heart-healthy California walnuts at Jewel Osco.
Just as soon as I see Jesus.
The Black church has been the root of the most celebrated aspects of Black culture.
The role of music in the Black church is everything.
It's something about those songs that brings joy.
Tuesday at 9 on WTTW.
Hi, Chicago. I'm Felicia. You're watching WTTW.
This evening's presentation of Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Jim and Kay Mabey.
Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Paris Schatz.
And I'm Brandis Friedman. On the show tonight,
that President Trump is practically and morally responsible.
Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell votes to acquit former President Trump, but says he could still be held liable.
The implications of new research showing some surprising findings on the identities and backgrounds of the Capitol rioters.
To close these glaring loopholes in our laws.
2 years after a shooter killed 5 people in Aurora, gun control advocates push for action in Springfield.
Our city has had a lot of days like this, even this year.
It might seem like just another day of winter, but we hear why it's actually unusual to see this much snow.
Plus, dirty snow. It's not just unsightly, but it can affect rivers and lakes, too.
A member of the Biden administration's COVID task force calls for an equitable approach to vaccine distribution.
And addressing health and economic disparities in Illinois' 7th District with newly appointed State Senator Mike Simmons. But first, some of today's top stories. Most Chicago public school students aren't back to in-person learning yet, but the ones who were will have remote learning tomorrow. CPS announced the change today, along with a raft of suburban school districts due to the winter storm. The near whiteout conditions have also closed all public COVID-19 testing sites through at least Wednesday. The Chicago Department of Public Health says anyone in need of a COVID-19 test during the closures should contact their primary care physician or review other COVID-19 testing sites. And we'll have much more on today's wild winter weather in just a bit. Illinois health officials say they will put a priority on getting second doses to residents who have already received their first dose of the coronavirus vaccine. That does mean fewer people will be able to receive a first dose because of the limitations in vaccine availability. Starting in 10 days, all Illinoisans over the age of 16 with pre-existing health conditions will be eligible. But today, Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot and Health Commissioner Dr. Allison Arwady say the city will likely not have enough supply to meet the new demand, even though shipments are slightly ticking upward.
We were getting 6,000 first doses per day. This coming week, we anticipate getting 6,700 doses per day. Nowhere near enough, as the mayor said, progress, and we're happy to be able to do some more planning. But we're working very hard behind the scenes to make sure that when we commit to giving somebody a first dose here in Chicago, that second dose will follow.
Meanwhile, Illinois public health officials report more than 1,400 new cases of the coronavirus in the last 24 hours, including 41 additional deaths. That makes for a statewide total of 1.16 million cases. And the state has passed another grim milestone at 20,002 deaths. The 7-day test positivity rate is 3.5%. And now to Paris for analysis of this weekend's impeachment trial outcome. Paris.
Brandis, the outcome was never much in doubt this weekend, but 7 Republican senators did vote to convict former President Donald Trump for his role in the insurrection attempt January 6th. Some of those senators now face political fallout as others in the party believe sticking with the former president is the way back to power in 2022. Here's a short clip from closing arguments on Saturday.
Because their case is so weak, the House managers have taken a kitchen sink approach to the supposedly single article of impeachment.
Senators, this trial in the final analysis is not about Donald Trump. The country and the world know who Donald Trump is. This trial is about who we are.
And joining us to talk about the fallout are Heidi Kitrosser, a visiting professor of constitutional law at Northwestern University, author and podcaster Dan Sinker, who has been writing a newsletter about the impeachment trial, and Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of Real Clear Politics. Welcome all of you back to Chicago tonight. Heidi Kitrosser, getting to 67 votes never seemed like it was a likely outcome. Is there a message here sent that 7 Republicans did vote to convict the president?
Yes, that vote was actually quite extraordinary. Until the impeachment #1 of Trump, there had never in American history been a case in which anyone in the Senate, any senator, had crossed party lines to vote to convict someone of the opposite or someone of their own party. Mitt Romney was the first. That was just 1 vote. So getting 7 votes actually is quite extraordinary, even though, as you say, of course, it falls well short of 17.
And in this impeachment trial, there was new video footage presented as evidence showing the former Vice President Mike Pence being rushed out, Senator Romney narrowly avoiding some of the rioters. There was the news of Trump's phone call with Kevin McCarthy saying, quote, "I guess they care more about the election than you." This came from Representative Jamie Herrera Butler from Washington. Clearly it's showing Trump not acting with any urgency to quell the unrest. Dan Sinker, was any of that persuasive, do you think, to the final outcome?
It had to have been persuasive, right? That stuff was not just harrowing to watch as a viewer that was very far from D.C., but it had to have been incredibly harrowing as somebody that lived through it the first time. And then to see, as we learned, that people like Mitt Romney didn't actually know quite how close the mob had gotten to them. I think it could not have hurt, right? It had to have helped push a few people over that line.
And Tom Bevan, what about the defense strategy? Although the defense lawyers did get a fair share of criticism for an unfocused strategy, but, you know, saying Democrats had said stuff about riots in the summer, using the word fight, that the president did say protest peacefully in part of his speech on the 6th. Were any of those arguments persuasive?
You know, for me, the defense started off with this sort of aimless, wandering, hapless defense, but got stronger as the trial went on, and pointing out that the Democrats had manipulated evidence and made their final arguments. And the Democrats actually, I thought, had the opposite. They started off very, very strong, made a very persuasive case, and then sort of stumbled at the end with this stunt about calling, they were going to surprise calling witnesses, which failed, and then getting into trouble on this evidence thing. So at the end of the day, though, I really don't know that maybe it changed a vote here or there on the margins, but I really don't think that there was there were a lot of minds to be swayed. I think we knew that the outcome of this was predetermined well before the trial even began.
Certainly, as we said at the top, but one of the more surprising statements afterward came from Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, who basically all but blamed Trump for the insurrection, even though he voted to acquit. Let's take a look at what he said.
There's no question, none, that President Trump is practically and morally responsible for provoking the events of the day. No question about it. President Trump is still liable for everything he did while he was in office as an ordinary citizen. unless the statute of limitations is run, still liable for everything he did while he's in office. Didn't get away with anything yet.
So Heidi Kitrosser, his vote to acquit is based on his belief that a non-sitting president cannot be impeached or tried, even though McConnell did have the power to hold a trial while Trump was still president. With McConnell, there's always a political strategy. We all know that he wants to be in the majority. What's the political strategy here?
Well, I think he really was trying to straddle the fence. I think he was concerned that my guess is he was concerned that there would have been massive backlash from the part of the base that loves Trump had he not voted to acquit. I also think he didn't want to send a signal to other members of the party suggesting any pressure to vote toward acquittal. But by making the statement that he did, I think he also gave cover to Republicans in sort of more purple states, as well as those who had voted to convict. So that's my guess as to the political strategy.
And Dan Sinker, there was some drama over the weekend about possibly calling witnesses, as there was a vote to affirm that, and then Republicans came back with a long list of witnesses that they wanted to call. Eventually, there were no witnesses. What was behind that drama and the final outcome that nothing really happened?
Well, I mean, I think we're still learning what was behind that drama, right? But I think that there had been a statement on Friday night that the House managers felt was going to help kind of make their case that the president didn't lift a finger and, in fact, encouraged the violence while it was actually taking effect. And by every report, it seems that they took the Senate Democrats almost entirely by surprise. And it ended up, I mean, I think everyone that was covering or watching the trial closely woke up on Saturday thinking it was going to be a quick day. And then suddenly, there was this, everything went out the window for about 90 minutes. And then suddenly it all got reeled back in and it ended up being quite a quick day. So it was surprising, and then it wasn't.
Tom Bevan, let's talk about what happens going forward. Some of the Republicans, like Senator Cassidy from Louisiana, facing censure among his state party. Same with Senator Burr in North Carolina. How does this impact the GOP going forward and this internal battle over whether to stick with Trump or to move away from him? And by the way, that battle seems pretty lopsided at this point.
Yeah, no, it's going to be fascinating to see how this all plays out and how the party moves forward, particularly, primary challenges in 2022. It's also going to actually be a challenge for the Democrats, who have been united and have papered over schisms within their own caucus because they were unified against Trump. Now that battle is over. Trump is going to be off the scenes. And so some of these schisms within the Democratic Party are going to bubble to the surface. So I think it's going to be fascinating to watch this play out. Donald Trump is still a force within the Republican Party. There's no getting around that. The question is how he, chooses to play his game and make himself part of the conversation moving forward, whether he chooses to run again, whether he chooses to, play in the midterm elections. And it certainly is going to be something that Republicans are going to have to deal with. And right now, I think the jury's still out in terms of which way the party's going to go. But certainly Trump, if not Trump the personality, but certainly Trump's policies are right now at the core of the Republican Party.
All right, there's so much to get to, but we're going to have to leave it there. Our thanks to Heidi Kitrosser, Dan Sinker, and Tom Bevan. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And the impeachment trial may be over, but hundreds of rioters who stormed the Capitol on January 6th are still facing criminal charges. There's been widespread coverage about some of the insurrectionist ties to far-right militias and white supremacist groups. But new research out of the University of Chicago paints a more nuanced picture of who exactly the rioters were. Are there any broad conclusions that can be drawn from this? Joining us with more is Robert Pape, political science professor at the University of Chicago and director of the Chicago Project on Security and Threats. Professor Pape, great to have you back. Before we get into the specifics here, give us the 3 to 4 sentence abstract of what your study found.
It's terribly important that we understand the who were the insurrectionists on January 6th if we're going to develop viable solutions that truly work for America. With a large research team of 22, we have studied over 250 individuals who have been arrested for either breaking into the Capitol building or grounds on January 6th. That's 250 of the 800 who did that. Our findings are really quite surprising. It turns out only a small fraction are a collection of right-wing militias. What we see is a new mass political movement with violence at its core.
And only 10% of those militias, the other 90% folks that have not associated with that. You also dug into some other demographic info. 85% were employed, including, well, we're taking a look at the graphic here of folks not in militias. 85% were employed, including some CEOs and small business owners, 9% unemployed. What does that tell you?
Well, what's really striking, so I've been doing demographic profiles of political violence here for 3 decades. And what's striking is the 13% who are business owners on January 6th. The 28%, in addition to those 13%, who come from white-collar occupations, doctors, lawyers, accountants. This is very striking, Paris, because normally we don't even have a category for business owner when we study political violence. And so this is a very big sign that we're dealing with a new political movement with violence at its core that can't be reduced easily to the usual suspects. That is, if only we just simply rounded up all the Proud Boys here, we'd be going to nip the problem in the bud. There are Proud Boys, to be sure, but almost 90% are not affiliated with any organized military group or militia, and this is really very important.
And it's not exclusively low. It's not exclusively low income, as you find here. Although at the same time, the Washington Post did analysis that found that 60% of those arrested had faced prior money troubles, debt, foreclosure, tax liens. How do you square those sets of data?
Well, I've talked to Todd. So Todd was the reporter, and you'll see he quotes our study fondly here. Well, he goes back 2 decades. And as I told him, and when he said in his piece, it's very important when you go back 2 decades to realize that things that happened 20 years ago may not have bearing on what you did on January 6th. Now, they might. I'm not trying to say they don't at all. But that just means we need to have more understanding here to see as we go forward. So Todd looked at just 125 here, so not the full set of, over 250. Here. And if you include the full set, you would see that it really reduces those numbers down. I don't want to diminish Todd's work. I think he's done great work, but this just only points to how we need to do more truly systematic analysis.
And people can still be employed and be facing money troubles, as we all know. You also found that counties won by President Joe Biden actually produced more rioters than counties won by Trump, and that makes a little bit of sense because Biden tended to win the more populous counties. What else do we glean from that info?
Well, most people thought right after the insurrection that these insurrectionists are coming from the reddest parts of America. That's just not the case here. So these are 57% are coming from large urban areas like Dallas. Dallas is hardly thought of as Trump country. Dallas, Biden won comfortably with 65% of the vote. But Dallas also had over 300,000 voters for Trump, and they sent 4 insurrectionists on January 6th. So what this is telling us is that when people interact and sort of with other folks, as they often do in large cities like Dallas, that's not a pat solution that's really going to work in this situation. The same with other pat solutions like unemployment. Normally, we think right-wing militia groups, let's just get them a job here, because usually 25, 30% are unemployed. Well, if only 9% are unemployed and many are doctors and lawyers, that's not going to be a solution. Age is another factor in our study that here, 2/3 of the insurrectionists are over the age of 35. Normally, we find these violent individuals in their 20s and 30s. So that means that we just can't wait for them just to grow up and grow out of it. That's another PAT solution shot down by this deeper study of who the insurrectionists are.
And so clearly the solution has to be multi-pronged because, as you said, it's a large coalition now that seems to accept resorting to some level of violence here. So beyond targeting the militia groups, what's the broader strategy?
The big thing everybody wants, Paris, is give it to me right away. So the solution like tomorrow. The problem here is we've already made substantial findings and progress that shoot down the normal solutions. The next step is to thicken up our findings so that the diagnosis that we come up with can lead to solutions that will truly work for America. That is going to require more time. And in fact, we at CPOST are dedicated to, we're now putting the pieces together for a 3 to 6 month thrust of work to truly thicken up our understanding, not just sort of shoot from the hip and say, oh, yeah, that's obviously the thing to do. Too much of that right now is floating around on the airwaves, and it's getting us nowhere. Because what we need to build this on a diagnosis of the reality, not just kind of guess that, well, maybe it's this or maybe it's that.
All right, Robert Pape, so a lot of important work you're going to be doing in the future, and we hope to have you back to talk about it. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Paris.
And now, Brandis, we go back to you.
Paris, thank you. It has been 2 years since an aggrieved worker at the Henry Pratt warehouse in suburban Aurora killed 5 people. The shooter died as well. In that time, advocates for gun control say Illinois still hasn't taken necessary steps to fix problems with state firearms laws. Amanda Vinicky joins us now with more. Amanda.
Brandis, it was 2 years ago today that Abby Parker lost her husband. 2 years ago, her son lost his father when Clayton Parks was among the 5 victims shot and killed by an employee who'd been fired.
Clay had such a charismatic personality. He was determined and hardworking and loved by everyone that knew him. But he was only 32 years old when he died, and he had so much more life to live.
Park says to honor Clay's memory would be to address loopholes in Illinois' gun laws, loopholes without which, she says, her husband and the others killed would still be alive. The shooter shouldn't have been able to buy and have the handgun used that day. He had a felony on his record, but an out-of-state error essentially meant Illinois State Police initially missed it. They later found that, revoked the shooter's firearm owner's identification, or FOID card, which meant the shooter couldn't legally own guns, but no law enforcement had actually taken them away.
Following the Aurora tragedy, we were forced to confront the reality that a large part of Illinois' gun violence crisis is caused by dangerous loopholes in our FOID card permit to purchase system.
In the wake of the shooting, the Illinois House approved a measure touted as Fix the FOID, but it never passed the state Senate. Now its sponsors are trying again. They're pressing for a few changes, like a requirement that anyone applying for a FOID card get fingerprinted.
So that we can verify identification. People can't easily change their names or have a common name and slip through a crack and be able to get their guns.
There's no other fundamental right that requires a fingerprints to exercise it. It is also ridiculous that prices everything out of reach for the average person. And if you have a family that all have FOID cards, it can be very expensive to get fingerprints for everyone.
The Illinois State Rifle Association's director, Richard Pearson, says the second change isn't needed either. Advocates want to really empower state and local police, essentially require them to retrieve guns from owners with revoked FOID cards. He says that while police may not have been, in his words, ferocious about doing that before the Aurora shooting, they are aggressive about it now. The Illinois State Police likewise indicate they have taken this more more seriously since that 2019 Aurora shooting. In a statement today, ISP says that it created a web portal that local police and prosecutors can access to verify whether someone's in compliance with the FOID law. That state police created a special detail to enforce gun takebacks after FOID revocations, and that background checks last year blocked 11,500 attempts to unlawfully get a FOID card. But then hear from Tammy Tummel. She's a downstate domestic violence prevention advocate.
Right now, we know there are so many dangerous loopholes that allow violent domestic violence offenders who have had their FOID cards revoked to keep their guns. And in my career, I have seen so many victims who were forced to live in fear because their abusers had guns or they were threatened. And these guns we tried to get them taken away and it didn't happen.
Now, another sought-after change requiring background checks for all gun sales. That is required when firearms are purchased from a dealer or at a gun show, but not for person-to-person sales.
Purchasing firearms, renewing FOID cards, renewing concealed carry cards, and their everyday background checks. So we have plenty of background checks. That's not necessary.
Pastor Terrence Howard contrasts this to the major actions governments took to prevent acts of terror.
In 2002, someone tried to get on an airplane with something in their shoes, and ever since then, we have had to disrobe to get on an airplane. In October of this year, every Illinoisan who wants to get on a plane will have to get something called a real ID. It's not negotiable. It's not debatable. This is the ways in which they've closed identity loopholes.
He says it is time to apply that same seriousness and gusto to gun crime prevention. Meanwhile, more Illinoisans than ever are applying for FOID cards. I asked the Rifle Association's Pearson what he thinks is the reason.
Well, because people have to protect themselves. They suddenly realize that you can't depend on the police to protect you.
But that increase, combined, Pearson says, with staff shortages due to previous defunding of the ISP, has caused a long delay in processing FOID applications, enough that the Rifle Association is suing. Pearson says another lawsuit may soon be coming along on behalf of members frustrated with also long delays in granting permits for concealed carry licenses. While not addressing the FOID lawsuit, State Police Director Brendan Kelly today said in a statement that the Henry Pratt shooting in Aurora revealed clearly the need to use less of our resources on an outdated, inefficient renewal process that's similar to that of a fishing license, and more on enforcement against real threats to public safety. He indicated the state police will seek action and authority from the legislature to, as he put it, untangle that patchwork. Now, yesterday, by the way, was the 13th anniversary of the mass shooting at Northern Illinois University in DeKalb that left 5 students and the shooter dead. Yesterday also was when 3 years ago, 17 people died in the Parkland High School shooting. President Joe Biden is calling for congressional action. He wants a ban on so-called assault weapons, and he also is calling for more background checks. Brandis, back to you.
Some grim anniversaries there, Amanda. Thank you. Up next, we meet the newest member of the Illinois General Assembly. Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight, Black Voices. What do you believe prevents a strong coalition of Black and Latino communities forming across the communities?
I want us to, as a nation, to find a way to come together.
Go down the block, get it from someone local, and keep the money in the community.
Black joy and the Black experience is magical.
Neighbors in Rogers Park, Edgewater, Uptown, and Ravenswood have a new state senator representing them in Springfield who says he plans to tackle health and economic disparities. Filling the seat vacated by State Senator Heather Staines, newly appointed Mike Simmons is making history as Illinois' first openly gay state senator and the first Black state senator to represent the 7th District. Before becoming a full-time lawmaker, Simmons was deputy director of the Obama Foundation's My Brother's Keeper Alliance and senior official in Mayor Rahm Emanuel's administration. Joining us to discuss his plans for Illinois' 7th District is State Senator Mike Simmons. Congrats on the new appointment, State Senator, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. It's good to be here, Brandis.
So you've never held elected office before. Why this one? Why now?
Well, for me, it made sense for a lot of reasons. The first is that, we're at a point right now where people from all over the country are stepping up. They're speaking out on the issues. They are fighting for justice. And this community, the 7th District is the most diverse Senate district in the state. I'm a native of the district. I grew up in Lincoln Square. I went to school here. My mother and father both were small business owners in the district. And so, with all the good work that's been happening in Springfield around the Black Lives Agenda, criminal justice reform, health equity, economic opportunity legislation was recently passed, it seemed like the right time for me to step up as a millennial, as a Black person, as a gay person, as the son of an immigrant, and to serve at that level.
And now, as you just said, you're making history in a couple of ways. First openly gay state senator, first Black senator to represent the 7th District in Illinois. How do those personal experiences, how will they help inform how you do your new job?
Well, I think that it's so important to have people in elected office who have the lived experiences to be able to articulate the needs of the community and to advocate on behalf of people from across the spectrum. The 7th District is a vibrant community, but in neighborhoods like Rogers Park and Uptown, and even parts of northern Lincoln Square and Edgewater, there are a whole lot of people that are struggling. You've got a high number of households in this district that are headed by single parents, moms and dads. You've got a pretty high percentage of households that have undocumented immigrants. My father was a refugee from Ethiopia, came to Edgewater in the 1980s, came here and was granted political asylum. And so I know that there is another generation of immigrants that are coming into this part of Chicago. The 7th District is kind of like the Ellis Island for people from all over parts of Central America and South America, East Africa, West Africa, Southern Europe, Eastern Europe. And so, I want to go to bat for those families. And I think that having that lived experience has prepared me to do that effectively.
Now, you grew up in the district, which, as we mentioned at the top of the story, includes Rogers Park, Edgewater, Uptown, parts of Ravenswood. You just expressed a little bit of it, but what are some of the unique, some of the unique issues that you would like to address in a community as diverse as this one?
Well, the one issue that I think crisscrosses all of those populations is economic insecurity. And a lot of this has been aggravated by the pandemic. We've got households in this district where people are working 2 and 3 different jobs, often in transient, low-wage work, where folks are barely making enough hours to be able to even qualify for employer-sponsored health insurance. I think that this is a big problem across the entire state, but it's poignant in this district. And so that's an issue that I've already set up meetings with the state agencies to start looking into this issue and seeing how we can get more people who are at the bottom of the economic ladder into a situation where they actually have health insurance and have access to doctors. I think that's important if we're going to tackle health disparities, particularly because in this district, you have a fair amount of people who are living with untreated mental health conditions, undiagnosed conditions, and oftentimes are falling through the cracks and not getting access to treatment. And so what I want to do is to bring together all of the hospitals in this district and all of the federally qualified health clinics and other providers to focus on this issue and see how we can close the gaps for those populations.
Now, additionally, you're the son of a Black American mother. You mentioned your father, an Ethiopian refugee who moved to Edgewater in the 80s. How has, the journey of being the children of these two parents and your father's journey especially, how does that inspire you?
It inspires me on a really personal level. My mother is just the most loving woman who sacrificed every single thing possible so that me and my sister can do what we do now, right? Achieve our dreams, right? Run for office, run my own business, and live in this community. And my dad, just the way that he got to America, walked through a desert for 8 days with his brother, with my uncle, just to be able to make it to America and to be able to have me and have my younger brother and to, do the great things that he's done with his life. I'm looking to go to bat for a vision that allows the next generation to have access to the same opportunities in the way that I had. And the way that I do that, I think, is just from having that lived experience and understanding policy and understanding government and being able to navigate both to achieve.
I was just going to say, Well, and in that, you've had the chance to travel and learn about the slave trade. It eventually led you to your work on anti-racist public policy at Blue Sky Strategies. How do you plan on bringing that experience to the job?
Right. So, when I left City Hall in 2016, I took a year off and I went and traveled through West Africa. So a lot of your viewers, in addition to my public policy work, I have a pretty avid interest in history. And so I wanted to go through West Africa, and I wanted to explore my mother's side of the family, because Black Americans have been robbed from their ancestry. We don't really have a direct tie to countries or language. And so having a dad from Ethiopia, right, prompted me to be really interested in that. And so I spent that time in Africa going through 7 or 8 different countries, visiting the villages, trying to learn the language. I don't know that I actually mastered the languages, but I put in the effort to do that. And when I came back to the States, I had a really keen perspective on what institutional racism looks like in this country, because I have been in other places where you don't see it. And so when I started my company, I said I wanted to take my public policy expertise from my career, lived experiences as somebody that knows how institutional racism sort of plays itself out on families and people's livelihoods and access to opportunity, and then build smart public policy that pinpoints that systemic racism and then proposes ways to break through it. And so that's really the work that I want to do as a state senator, is to bring that into the debates around healthcare access, access to economic opportunity, and even areas around open government, and who even has the opportunity to run for office, because that's a whole other area where there are big structural barriers.
Well, and on that note, Senator, before we let you go, the process of replacing Senator Stearns has its critics. What did you think of the process of a committee selecting the successor instead of a voter in this instance?
Right. I mean, I want to say that my preference would always be that people would be able to vote in elections. I think it's amazing to be able to campaign and put together a message and engage a lot of people. That is the kind of candidate that I would like to be. I think in this particular instance, we had a more open process than we typically have seen in these appointment processes. But I think we have to go a lot further. Some of the ideas that I put on the table, I think that we should think about amending the Open Meetings Act so that when we have vacancies in the state legislature, there's a requirement that the deliberations around who will succeed the outgoing legislator, those are made public so that everybody can see how the committeemen are discussing the qualifications, how the committeemen are arriving at the decision of who the new state representative, who the new state senator is going to be. So I think that that's something that I would want to push. And I think we should be looking to have a minimum number of weeks that would transpire between when there's a vacancy or resignation and when a decision is made on who the new person is going to be, because then that gives a lot of people an opportunity to participate in the process. And so I think those are 2 concrete things that we can do. And I think the other thing that we should do, which is what we did in this process, is have those open public forums so that people can get to know the candidates.
Okay, a lot to think about there. Congrats, and thank you for joining us to 7th District State Senator Mike Simmons.
Thank you.
And now, Paris, back to you.
Thanks, Brandis. And still to come on Chicago Tonight, what's making today's weather so extreme and what resources are available for the homeless? Plus, dirty snow from cars and other activities can impact regions like the Himalayas, the science behind the looks. And a member of the Biden administration's COVID task force with local ties calls for an equitable approach to COVID vaccine distribution. But first, some more of today's top stories. Mayor Lori Lightfoot calls the current snowstorm a, quote, all-hands-on-deck moment. The mayor says she's deployed more than 300 snow plows and salt spreaders as conditions on Chicago arteries get more and more treacherous. And the near-whiteout conditions have canceled more than 360 flights at O'Hare and Midway airports thus far. The National Weather Service has issued the winter storm warning through midday tomorrow, with snow totals approaching a foot or more localized near the lake. Lightfoot says she understands the concerns residents have about snowed-over residential streets right now, but she says the priority currently is keeping main thoroughfares clear.
But it's critically important that we keep the main streets open for emergency vehicles, for our buses, and other vehicles, so we can keep them moving. But I promise you, we will get to the residential streets as quickly as we can.
And much more on this winter weather in just a few moments. And state public health officials report more than 1,400 new cases of the coronavirus in the last 24 hours, including 41 additional deaths. That makes for a statewide total of 1.16 million cases and 20,002 deaths. The 7-day test positivity rate is 3.5%. And now to Brandis with what makes this season's snowfall unique. Brandis.
Yeah, that's right, Paris. If you've been thinking that there's been more snow than usual this February, you are correct. The average snowfall for this month is around 9 inches of snow. And now, at just only halfway through the month, we've already seen more than 11 inches. So how is the city, especially the most vulnerable within it, dealing with these intense snowstorms and cold weather? Joining us now with more are Doug Schenkelberg, the executive director of the Chicago Coalition for the Homeless, and Scott Collis, who you just saw there, climate scientist with Argonne National Laboratory. Thanks to you both for joining us. Scott, let's start with you, please. The last time we had you on, it was just a couple of weeks ago. It was snowing and really cold. Why has it rarely stopped since then?
You are going to promise to call me out when we have a nice sunny day in spring. So
of course, obviously.
Right? So when we last talked, I talked about how we were snapping into this cold pattern, and that our limit of predictability is about 7 days, and I couldn't really see a limit to the cold since then. Well, that pattern really stayed put. The buckle in the polar vortex directed those storms one after another down our way. And because we're in a La Nina year, we're a little bit wetter than normal, and that's really allowed these atmospheric rivers to hit the west coast of the United States, pump that moisture into central United States, so you get this Pacific moisture, Alaskan cold, and that means it pretty much snowed every day in the last 2 weeks.
Now, earlier today, Mayor Lori Lightfoot, she spoke about the harsh weather. Here's what she said.
For a lot of us, this is the perfect day to stay inside. Read a book, watch a movie, or for the brave at heart, bundle up the kids and go outside and play in the weather. But it's also for many, today's weather poses serious challenges to being safe and getting around.
Doug Schenkelberg, has COVID plus the weather sort of compounded any problems with capacity troubles in warming centers and shelters?
Well, it's definitely an issue. Homelessness was a crisis before the pandemic, before the extreme weather. So there was always issues that we had to deal with, even in the best of times. But when you add in the pandemic, which has forced shelters to adjust how many people they can stay in there, how much space they have to provide for individuals, so it's spread out, that causes an issue. You have to deal with the same thing as they open up warming centers to make sure that you're still maintaining safety protocols, making sure that folks can stay socially distanced and things like that. So the pandemic definitely adds a complication to responding to a weather crisis like this.
How do the centers handle that when the need basically goes up because of the weather, but the capacity is limited?
Well, they do add some capacity. The city has opened up 2 different warming shelters for 24-hour, so that folks can be there at any time during the day. They look for other places that they can add beds. Of course, it gets more complicated when you're trying to follow safety protocols in the pandemic. They utilize various city buildings, be it field houses in the parks, libraries, things of that ilk, as warming centers during normal business hours. So they do try to expand the capacity, but it's still complicated, and there's still a lot of folks that need warmth that don't find those places.
And Scott, what areas of the city are going to be hit hardest by this weather system we're seeing right now?
This quite unique event has 2 real components to it. You've got the widespread snowfall that's going to deliver around 6, maybe 8 inches to the collar counties. However, the real story here is Lake Michigan, which is running at about 44 degrees Fahrenheit, which is very warm, with very little ice. So it's producing a really large lake effect snow that will really impact that 10 miles of lakeshore. And these kind of situations are fairly difficult to forecast because they're quite chaotic in nature. However, we will see around 10 to maybe even 14 inches of snow in and around the city. But what really makes this a nasty one is it's going to be cold. So it's going to be down around 10 degrees Fahrenheit, which means that those road chemicals are going to have a very limited effect. So Mayor Lightfoot is exactly right. It's a great night to stay home.
Yeah. Doug, there have been 9 hypothermia-related deaths so far this season. What are the additional health concerns for those who cannot stay home, who are homeless this winter?
So, people experiencing homelessness, there's a large percentage of those individuals who have underlying health conditions to begin with. That's one of the things that precipitates people entering into homelessness. We know that a lot of those individuals are also older, so they tend to have vulnerabilities even in the best of times. So with the cold weather, that exacerbates those vulnerabilities. If they can't get into warm shelter, hopefully they have enough warm clothing, blankets, things of that ilk to keep themselves warm, particularly those folks who are dealing in tent encampments around the city.
Now, speaking of tent encampments, earlier this month, a group of homeless people were given the opportunity to stay in a hotel for a night to get out of the cold. But then they came back to find out that streets and sanitation crews had cleared their belongings at 51st and Wentworth. Doug, what's your reaction to that?
It's a travesty, and that's exactly what we should not be doing in this moment or any moment. These folks, they live in community in this encampment to be safe and to support each other, and some kind souls got them hotel rooms so that they could be warm in this weather. And the aldermen and streets and sanitation turned around and used that opportunity to throw out all of their belongings, which is not what we should see in this moment. We should see things where aldermen and other elected officials are, like many of our neighbors, are stepping up to help people and to find them hotel rooms and see what they need. That should be our response. It's incredibly frustrating that people would lose their possessions at any point, but particularly in a moment like this.
Scott, you said about 10 to 14 inches by the time this is over. Is that an unusual amount, and when can we expect this to let up?
It is an unusual amount. 12 plus inch snowfalls usually only happen 1 in every 3 years, so to get 2 in 1 year is either very unlucky or very lucky, depending on your preference for snow. This is Chicago. Spring will come. It mightn't feel like it now. If you don't like the weather, wait a couple of weeks. The good news is that, last time we talked, I said that, warm weather was outside the range of predictability. However, right now, the weather simulations we use to work out what's down the track are telling us that we should see a warm-up. We might even see above freezing temperatures come Saturday and Sunday, which I think would be very welcome.
Oh, wow. For the first time in a few weeks. I think we all like to think that this kind of weather means we're paying our dues and it's going to get great soon, but I think we have to ride it out. My thanks to you both, Scott and Doug. Thanks for joining us. I appreciate it. And now to Paris and why dirty snow is more than just an image problem. Paris.
Thanks, Brandis. Although everything looks neat and white outside now, much of the snow will get dirty at some point, and that's a problem that goes deeper than just the looks of it. WTTW News reporter Patty Wetley joins us now with more. So, Patty, what do we know about dirty snow?
Well, for starters, here's what we know about clean snow is that fresh blanket that we're getting like every day reflects like 80 to 90% of the sun's radiation. And then as soot and dirt particles, dark colored particles around in the air land on the snow, they start to absorb more sunlight. And that actually can help or cause snow to melt faster, even more so than if the temperature were to actually raise.
So the snow could melt even if the temperature doesn't get above freezing. Patty, wouldn't some say that faster melting snow is better?
You might think that because we for sure could have used some melting before we got like another foot of snow. But think about places like the Himalayas or glaciers in Antarctica, and dust is starting to layer onto those kind of places that used to be pristine because humans have just kicked up so much dirt and soot and particles in the air. And when those melt faster, that creates a serious problem in terms of global warming, in terms of how fast glaciers are melting, all sorts of issues. So dirty snow, not that great.
And bringing it back more locally is probably going to wreak havoc on stormwater systems here if it does melt fast. All right, Patty, Thank you so much.
Thanks, Paris.
And you can read Patty's full story on our website. It's all at WTTW.com/news. And up next, efforts to achieve an equitable vaccine rollout in a conversation that originally aired on our Saturday program, Chicago Tonight Latino Voices. But first, we take a look at the upcoming weather forecast.
Don't ever miss Chicago Tonight. Subscribe to our podcast. Get a daily download of our show delivered to your desktop or mobile device. Go to WTTW.com/Chicago Tonight Podcast and subscribe.
The COVID-19 outlook has slowly but steadily improved as vaccinations make their way into the arms of healthcare workers and older adults across the state and country. But data has indicated a troubling trend. The communities most at risk of COVID-19 infection are not the communities that are receiving the vaccines. Earlier this month, our next guest published an op-ed in USA Today urging an equity approach to vaccine distribution. And she joins us now, Dr. Julie Merida, Executive Vice President of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and a member of the Biden administration's COVID-19 Task Force. She also served as Commissioner of the Chicago Department of Public Health. Dr. Merida, welcome back and thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Brandis. Nice to see you again.
So we've seen in Chicago how the communities with the highest rate of vaccination are not the communities with the highest rates of infection, which are namely Black and Latino communities. With that limited supply of vaccine still, how are you proposing that state and local governments address that problem in the short term?
So, Brandis, we've seen with the COVID pandemic that while all communities in the United States have been affected by COVID, certain communities have been hit harder. And what we've seen is that Black, Latino, Native Americans are much higher risk for hospitalization and for death. And what we're proposing is that it's really important to focus in the vaccination efforts to make sure that Black, Latino, and Native Americans actually have access to the vaccine and can be vaccinated quickly as well. We don't want for this disproportionate impact that we saw play out early in the pandemic to see that continue on because people aren't getting vaccinated.
How does that look in the implementation, Dr. Merida? Right now, we know that states and governments are taking CDC's guidance and starting with healthcare workers, people who are over the age of 65. But to add the equity lens that it sounds like you're speaking of, how do you implement that?
So prioritization of who gets the vaccine is just part of the equation. In order to make sure that the vaccines are administered in an equitable manner, it's really important that certain steps are taken to make sure that everyone has access to the vaccines. I myself have struggled to get my parents' appointments because they're 86 and 91 years of age, and I have high-speed internet access at home and multiple devices that I can use. But there are plenty of households within the city and within the nation that don't have access to high-speed internet. So making sure that there's telephone systems to actually schedule appointments, having community workers go into the communities to actually help people register and make appointments, making sure that the clinics are actually located in the right places, and they're also accessible by public transportation and open after hours or on weekends. Because we know that not everyone can take off time from work to get a vaccine. We also know that not everybody has a car. So part of it is prioritization of who can get the vaccine, but the other part of it is making sure that the vaccines are actually equally accessible and easily accessible to all.
Some blame vaccine skepticism or hesitancy among Black and Latino Americans for fewer uptake in those communities. What are your thoughts on that theory?
So I think there's a lot more demand for vaccine than there is questioning or hesitancy about the vaccine. People are questioning and wanting to have more information about the vaccines because we have two brand new vaccines that have never been used before. And so people want to wait and see and learn. So there is a little bit of that. But there's also some deeper seated issues in terms of people not trusting vaccines in general or not trusting government. And those kinds of issues actually do need to be addressed. But I think in addition to making sure the vaccine is accessible easily, because there are the barriers there for sure, we also need to be addressing the questions and concerns that people have about the safety or the efficacy of vaccines. And that's not easy work. So it has to happen simultaneously, both making the vaccine accessible and then also working with the community to address their concerns.
And there's also obviously the concern about having enough vaccine. Here in Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker recently announced that people with comorbidities are now eligible to receive the vaccine as well. Here's some of what he said.
We here in Illinois are making plans and looking ahead to the expansion of Phase 1B eligibility to people of all ages who have comorbidities and underlying conditions as defined by the CDC, as well as those with disabilities. My administration will be working with all the local public health departments to fit these higher risk individuals into their community vaccination plans in the coming weeks.
Dr. Merida, how can states manage what it is that you're talking about, of course, getting vaccines to people with comorbidities, underserved communities, when the vaccine supply is still so limited?
So these are challenging times because the vaccine supply is limited. And I think it's critical that we get the vaccines out as quickly as possible. I think it is possible to do this work quickly and efficiently, but also there have to be the supports in place to actually help people to get registered for the vaccines, particularly those people who have been hit hardest. There are definitely programs that are in place both in Illinois, in Chicago, and other states where actually community health workers are going out into the communities to help people actually to register for the vaccines if they don't have high-speed internet access, to get the vaccines into community health centers, federally qualified health centers, and retail pharmacies located in our harder hit communities so that people actually have access to the vaccines. So again, prioritization is part of the solution, but we also need to make sure the vaccine is easily accessible. And it takes extra work and extra effort. Fortunately, there's more federal resources that are flowing both to states and local health departments so they can ramp up and scale up these efforts so that we can get the vaccine out as quickly as possible.
We also seem to have sort of a patchwork of different policies and approaches to this across the country. How does that affect getting the vaccine out as quickly as you say is needed?
So I think, in most of the public health responses that I was a part of when I was at the Chicago Department of Public Health, the large national efforts were best when they were coordinated at the federal, state, and local levels. We know that state and local governments are really playing critical roles, but it also requires some federal oversight to provide that kind of coordination to make sure that the states and locals that need more vaccine get the vaccine, those who need help in other ways, technical assistance or manpower, that they get those resources as well. So it's this federal, state, and local coordination that's really essential. What I'm seeing play out with the current administration is that there is more of that coordination that's happening. Federal government is stepping in to provide additional resources to pharmacies. They're also providing additional resources to community health centers. So this coordination is starting to happen, and I think we'll see an improved distribution of vaccine as a result.
And Dr. Morita, we've got about 30 seconds left, but what do you say to the idea that it shouldn't matter who is getting the vaccine so long as people are getting the vaccine? Doesn't that mean more people are getting vaccinated and starting to lower our rates?
I don't think it's an either or. We can definitely administer vaccines quickly and we can do it equitably. And now that resources are flowing from the federal government, it can actually happen quickly as well as equitably. And that's what's really important.
Dr. Julie Morita, thank you for joining us. It was good to see you again. All the best.
Take care.
We're back to wrap things up right after this.
And that is our show for this Monday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing. And you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news.
You can also get the show via podcast and the PBS video app. And please join us tomorrow night live at 7. Illinois Congress members react to Donald Trump's acquittal in his second impeachment trial. And what's happening with the next stimulus.
I give you my heart.
And exploring the impact of gospel music with Chicago's sister group, A4L. And now for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Paris Schutz.
And I'm Brandis Friedman. Thank you so much for watching. Stay healthy and safe and warm, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that's proud to serve its community through pro bono legal services.